Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, two of Israel's most powerful leaders, are facing intense international scrutiny as the conflict with Hamas escalates. While they frame Israel's military actions as a fight for survival, the International Criminal Court is raising questions about potential violations of international law. With reports of mounting civilian casualties and growing calls for accountability, the stakes couldn't be higher. In this video, we're exploring the roles of Netanyahu and Gallant in this unfolding crisis, the ICC's controversial involvement, and what this could mean for Israel's future on the global stage. Whether you stand with Israel or see the conflict from another perspective, this is a story you need to hear. To understand the stakes for Netanyahu, Gallant, and the International Criminal Court, we need to look at the broader context of their roles and the ICC's controversial jurisdiction. Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's longest-serving prime minister, has built his career on a platform of security and resilience. Known for his uncompromising stance against Hamas, Netanyahu has positioned himself as the face of Israel's defense against what he calls terrorism at its doorstep. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, a former general with decades of military experience, has been instrumental in shaping Israel's current military strategy in Gaza. He has described the ongoing campaign as essential to dismantling Hamas's ability to launch attacks on Israeli civilians. Together, Netanyahu and Gallant have presented a united front, emphasizing that the strikes are targeted and necessary for national security. On the other side of the equation is the ICC, tasked with investigating alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. For years, the court has been a thorn in Israel's side. In 2021, it launched an investigation into alleged crimes committed in Gaza and the West Bank, a move Israel rejected on the grounds that Palestine is not a recognized state and cannot confer jurisdiction. Palestinian leaders, however, have embraced the ICC as a platform to hold Israeli leaders accountable for what they describe as disproportionate attacks. Now, with the death toll mounting in Gaza and reports of civilian casualties dominating global headlines, the ICC's potential role in investigating Israel has returned to the spotlight. This development puts Netanyahu and Gallant in a precarious position, as any formal probe could have significant political and legal repercussions. The ICC's potential focus on Israel's actions in Gaza has raised critical questions about the balance between military strategy and international law. For Netanyahu and Gallant, the stakes go far beyond the battlefield. They could face personal legal challenges if the ICC decides to formally investigate their roles in the conflict. But how did we reach this point? And why is the ICC's involvement so contentious? The crux of the issue lies in the tension between Israel's military objectives and the principles of international humanitarian law. Netanyahu and Gallant have argued that their campaign is aimed at eliminating Hamas's military infrastructure, including rocket launch sites, tunnels, and command centers. They contend that Hamas deliberately embeds itself within civilian areas, turning schools, hospitals, and residential buildings into shields against Israeli airstrikes. Gallant has described this strategy as a cynical exploitation of human lives, placing the blame for civilian casualties squarely on Hamas. Critics, however, see things differently. International organizations, including Amnesty International and the United Nations, have pointed to the devastating toll on Gaza's civilian population. Reports of entire neighborhoods being reduced to rubble and hospitals struggling to function due to infrastructure damage have fueled accusations of disproportionate force. Under international law, even in conflicts involving non-state actors like Hamas, military operations must distinguish between combatants and civilians and ensure that civilian harm is minimized. This is where the ICC steps in. Its investigation into alleged war crimes in Gaza, which began in 2021, is rooted in the claims that Israel's military actions may violate these principles. If Netanyahu and Gallant are deemed responsible for authorizing operations that caused undue harm to civilians, they could face charges. This prospect has prompted fierce backlash from Israeli leaders, who argue that the ICC is biased against Israel and lacks jurisdiction over its actions. The implications of an ICC investigation are immense. For Netanyahu, it could undermine his credibility on the international stage and complicate Israel's relationships with key allies, particularly the United States, which has historically supported Israel in rejecting ICC authority. For Gallant, it raises questions about the accountability of military leaders in modern warfare. a precedent that could have far-reaching consequences for conflicts worldwide. The ICC's involvement also highlights a broader debate about the effectiveness of international justice in real-time conflicts. While its investigations can bring attention to alleged atrocities, critics argue that the court often lacks the enforcement power to make a tangible impact. Supporters of the ICC counter that its role is to uphold the principles of international law, even in the face of opposition from powerful states like Israel. As the conflict continues, Netanyahu and Gallant's leadership will be tested not just by their ability to manage the military campaign, but also by their capacity to navigate the growing scrutiny from the international community. Whether they can maintain their positions of power while facing potential legal challenges remains to be seen. To better understand the potential consequences for Netanyahu, Gallant, and Israel, let's examine some historical examples of similar scenarios where international law intersected with military actions and leadership. One prominent case involves Sudan's former president Omar al-Bashir, who faced charges of genocide and war crimes by the ICC for actions taken during the Darfur conflict. While Bashir was ultimately ousted from power, the ICC's charges significantly impacted his international standing, restricting his ability to travel and isolating Sudan on the global stage. For Netanyahu and Gallant, the risk of ICC scrutiny could similarly limit their diplomatic reach, even if formal charges are not pursued. Another relevant comparison is the NATO bombing campaign in Yugoslavia during the 1990s. Though aimed at stopping ethnic cleansing, some operations led to civilian casualties that drew criticism and calls for accountability under international law. Ultimately, the lack of ICC jurisdiction at the time shielded NATO leaders from prosecution. In contrast, the ICC's ongoing investigation into Gaza represents a shift toward holding leaders accountable, even in conflicts where the line between combatants and civilians is blurred. A more recent example can be seen in the scrutiny faced by US military leaders for drone strikes in the Middle East. While no formal ICC charges have been brought against American officials, international watchdogs have raised similar concerns about disproportionate harm to civilians. Israel's defense of its actions in Gaza echoes these arguments, focusing on the challenges of countering non-state actors who operate within civilian populations. These examples underscore a critical point. The ICC's involvement doesn't just impact the leaders under investigation. It influences how the global community perceives their actions and the broader conflict. For Netanyahu and Gallant, the parallels are clear. Their ability to justify Israel's military operations in Gaza will shape not only their legacies, but also the international narrative surrounding the conflict. If an ICC investigation proceeds, it could also set a precedent for future conflicts. Will the court expand its focus on leaders from powerful nations, or will political realities limit its reach? For now, Netanyahu and Gallant find themselves at the center of this debate, with the world watching their every move. So, what's the takeaway from all of this? Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant find themselves at a critical juncture, not just for Israel's military campaign, but for their political and personal futures. As the ICC considers its role in investigating the conflict, the stakes extend far beyond the borders of Gaza. For Netanyahu, a leader whose tenure has been defined by his tough stance on security, and for Gallant, whose military strategies are now under intense scrutiny, the potential for international legal action looms large. The ICC's involvement raises broader questions about accountability in modern warfare. Can international law effectively balance the need for military action with the protection of civilians? And how will the actions of leaders like Netanyahu and Gallant shape global expectations for justice in conflict zones? For Israel, the implications are profound. The ICC's attention could strain alliances, shift public opinion, and challenge its ability to operate on the global stage. For Palestinians in Gaza, the debate over accountability highlights the ongoing humanitarian toll of this protracted conflict. As we continue to watch these events unfold, one thing is clear. The decisions made by Netanyahu, Gallant, and the ICC will resonate far beyond this moment, shaping the future of international law and the legacy of one of the world's most contentious conflicts. If you found this analysis insightful, don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more deep dives into the biggest stories shaping our world. And be sure to check out our next video for updates on this and other global issues. Thanks for watching.